20 years ago, on a cold winter night in Detroit, something extraordinary happened that would change not just one life, but 7 lives forever. The streets were quiet, covered in a thin layer of fresh snow, when Officer James Mitchell's radio crackled with a call about a possible disturbance in one of the city's rougher neighborhoods. James wasn't supposed to be working that night. He had swapped shifts with his colleague who needed to attend his son's school play. Little did he know that this simple act of kindness would lead him to his destiny. As he pulled up to the old brick building, something felt different about this call. After 15 years on the force, he had developed a sort of sixth sense about these things. The apartment building was run down, with peeling paint and a broken front door that creaked loudly as he pushed it open. The call had come from apartment 4B, and as James climbed the stairs, he could hear soft whimpers coming from above. His hand instinctively moved to his weapon, not out of fear, but from years of training and experience. When he reached the 4th floor, what he found wasn't the typical domestic disturbance scene he'd expected. Instead, 6 young girls, all African American, were huddled together in a small, cold apartment. The oldest one, who couldn't have been more than 12, stood protectively in front of her younger sisters. Their eyes were filled with a mix of fear and defiance. They had clearly been through more than any child should ever experience. The apartment told its own story. Empty cupboards stood open, a few scattered toys lay about, and a stack of past-due bills sat on a rickety table. The heat had been turned off, and the girls were keeping warm under shared blankets. The oldest girl explained that their mother had left weeks ago, promising to return but never did. Their father hadn't been in the picture for years. James felt something shift inside him as he looked at these 6 sisters. He had seen many sad situations in his career, but this was different. These girls weren't just scared, they were fighters. Despite their circumstances, they had stuck together, the older ones taking care of the younger ones. The youngest, barely 2 years old, was clean and well-fed, showing how her sisters had sacrificed their own portions to keep her healthy. As he followed protocol and called Child Protective Services, James learned more about their story. The oldest girl had been keeping up with her schoolwork while caring for her sisters. She would wake up early, get her siblings ready, drop the younger ones at a neighbor's house, and head to school. After school, she'd pick them up and do it all over again. They had been surviving on what little food they could get from kind neighbors and the school's free lunch program. The CPS worker arrived quickly, but her words hit James like a punch to the gut. "We'll have to separate them," she said matter-of-factly. "It's nearly impossible to find a home willing to take 6 children, especially older ones." The girls' faces fell as they understood what this meant. They would be split up, sent to different foster homes, possibly never to see each other again. James watched as the oldest sister's brave facade cracked slightly. She pulled her sisters closer, and the youngest one started to cry. In that moment, something incredible happened, something that would seem crazy to anyone else. James heard himself saying, "What if I took them?" The CPS worker looked at him like he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. He was a 35-year-old single man, working long hours as a police officer. He lived in a modest 3-bedroom house, and his experience with children was limited to his nieces and nephews who visited during holidays. But as he looked at these 6 brave girls, he knew in his heart that this was meant to be. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and arrangements. James called his supervisor to explain the situation, then his sister for support. The girls remained quiet, watching him with a mixture of hope and disbelief. They had learned the hard way not to trust too easily, but something about Officer Mitchell was different. As temporary arrangements were made for the girls to stay together in emergency foster care while James started the adoption process, he made them a promise. "I don't know much about being a father, and I'm sure I'll make mistakes. But I promise you this, you'll never have to worry about being separated, and you'll never have to wonder if someone's coming back for you. Because I'm not going anywhere." That night, as James drove home to begin preparing his house for 6 new residents, he wondered if he was crazy. His mind raced with all the challenges ahead, the cultural differences, the logistics, the financial strain. But then he remembered the look in those girls' eyes, the way they protected each other, their resilience in the face of abandonment. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Little did Officer James Mitchell know that this decision would not only transform these girls' lives, but would also lead to one of the most remarkable stories of love, family, and redemption that his city had ever seen. This was just the beginning of a journey that would prove that family isn't about blood, it's about who's willing to hold your hand when you need it most. The next few weeks turned James Mitchell's world upside down in ways he never could have imagined. His first challenge came right at the start. His 3-bedroom house wasn't nearly big enough for 7 people. He spent every spare moment between shifts converting his home office and basement into cozy bedrooms. His police buddies thought he'd lost his mind, but they still showed up with paintbrushes and tools to help. "You're either the craziest or the bravest man I've ever met," his partner told him while helping to assemble bunk beds. James just smiled, knowing that sometimes the craziest decisions are the ones that make the most sense to your heart. The adoption process was far from smooth. Being a single white man trying to adopt 6 African American girls raised eyebrows and questions. Some people questioned his motives, while others doubted his ability to raise girls, let alone children from a different racial background. The social workers grilled him extensively, making sure he understood the responsibility he was taking on. During one particularly tough meeting, a social worker asked, "How do you plan to handle their cultural identity? These girls need to stay connected to their heritage." It was a fair question, and James had thought about it carefully. He explained how he'd already reached out to several black female officers at the precinct who had offered to mentor the girls. He'd also connected with local community centers and found black-owned businesses in the neighborhood. "I know I can't teach them everything about their culture firsthand," he admitted, "but I can make sure they have strong role models and a community that supports them. I'm here to learn alongside them." His honesty and dedication impressed even the skeptics. Meanwhile, the girls were staying in temporary foster care, and James visited them every day after his shift. He'd bring small gifts, hair accessories, books, or sometimes just their favorite snacks. The youngest one would run to him shouting, "Officer James," while the older ones watched cautiously, still afraid to let their guards down completely. Learning to do their hair was one of his first big challenges. One evening, he sat on the floor of the foster home with YouTube tutorials playing on his phone, practicing braiding on a doll. The second oldest girl couldn't help but giggle at his clumsy attempts. "You're doing it all wrong," she said, finally coming over to show him the proper technique. It was the first time she'd voluntarily spoken to him, and James considered it a huge victory. The financial reality hit hard too. James had always lived comfortably on his police salary, but supporting 6 growing girls would be different. He started picking up extra shifts and sold his beloved motorcycle. His sister helped him create a budget, and he learned to clip coupons and shop sales. Who knew there were so many different types of shampoo? He joked while filling his cart at the discount store. One day, as he was painting the last bedroom, his phone rang. It was the adoption agency. James's heart stopped. This could make or break everything. The voice on the other end paused dramatically before saying, "Congratulations, Officer Mitchell. You've been approved." That evening, as he told the girls they could finally come home, the oldest one asked quietly, "What should we call you?" James thought for a moment before responding, "Whatever feels right to you." "I'm not trying to replace anyone. I just want to be here for you." The moving day was chaos mixed with excitement. Each girl had a small bag of belongings, and James had spent weeks collecting donated furniture, clothes, and supplies. His fellow officers showed up with their families, helping to carry boxes and arrange rooms. The precinct had organized a surprise welcome party, complete with a homemade banner and enough food to feed an army. As James watched the girls explore their new home, he noticed little personalities emerging. The oldest was still protective, but starting to relax slightly. The middle sisters were arguing over who got which bed, while the youngest was already making friends with the neighbors' kids through the fence. That first night was both beautiful and terrifying. After tucking everyone in, James sat in his kitchen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd taken on. Then he heard small footsteps. The second youngest couldn't sleep. She climbed onto his lap, something she'd never done before, and simply said, "Thank you for keeping us together." The challenges were far from over. James knew there would be tough days ahead. Homework struggles, teenage drama, cultural discussions, and countless other hurdles. But as he held that little girl, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. Before heading to bed himself, James pulled out his phone and deleted his dating apps. His mother had been pestering him for years about settling down and starting a family. He chuckled to himself, realizing he'd done exactly that, just not in the way anyone had expected. His family had come together in the most unexpected way, and he wouldn't have it any other way. As he finally lay down to sleep, exhausted but content, he could hear the soft breathing of his new daughters through the walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, in this moment, everything felt exactly as it should be. This wasn't just about saving 6 girls anymore. It was about building a family, one day at a time. The first year of their new life together was filled with moments that tested everyone's patience, strength, and love. James quickly learned that being a father to 6 girls meant facing challenges he'd never even imagined during his years on the police force. One particularly memorable morning started with a plumbing disaster. The oldest 2 girls were fighting over bathroom time, the middle ones couldn't find their school shoes, and the youngest had managed to flush a toy down the toilet. James stood in the hallway, already in his police uniform, trying to coordinate the chaos while on the phone with the plumber who couldn't come until next week. "Girls, everyone in the living room now," he called out, using his police officer voice without meaning to. They gathered, looking like a small, pajama-clad army. "Okay, new bathroom schedule starts today. Everyone gets 15 minutes, and we're posting it on the door. And no more toys near the toilet," he added, looking at his youngest daughter who gave him her best innocent smile. School brought its own set of challenges. The girls had missed a lot of classes during their time alone, and catching up wasn't easy. James spent his days off sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and worksheets. He'd never been great at math himself, but he was determined to help them succeed. One evening, while struggling with his second daughter's algebra homework, he noticed she wasn't really paying attention. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, setting down the pencil. She hesitated before speaking. "The kids at school. They keep asking questions about us. About why we don't look like you. Some of them say mean things." James's heart sank. He'd known this day would come, but it still hurt. He gathered all the girls for a family meeting. "Listen to me," he said, looking at each of them. "Family isn't about looking the same or having the same blood. It's about love, trust, and choosing to stick together no matter what. Anyone who can't understand that isn't worth your time." The oldest daughter spoke up, "But how do you deal with it? When people stare at us in the grocery store or ask if you're really our dad?" James thought carefully before answering. "I just remember that their opinions don't matter. What matters is right here in this room. We're family, and that's that." Cultural education became a priority in their household. James reached out to black female officers at his precinct who became regular visitors and mentors. They taught the girls about their heritage, helped with their hair, and shared stories about their own experiences. One officer even started a weekly dinner tradition, teaching both the girls and James how to cook traditional soul food recipes. There were funny moments too, like when James tried to learn double Dutch jump rope with the girls in their driveway. His colleagues drove by slowly, filming his awkward attempts and laughing. But James didn't mind. Seeing his daughters giggle and teach him something new was worth any embarrassment. The hardest moments were the emotional ones. Sometimes one of the girls would have a nightmare about their past, or a birthday would bring up memories of their birth mother. James learned to listen without judgment, to hold them when they cried, and to reassure them that it was okay to miss their old life while embracing their new one. One night, after a particularly rough day when his youngest had a meltdown at school, James sat on his back porch feeling overwhelmed. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his police partner checking in. "How's Super Dad doing?" James smiled, typing back, "Some days I feel more like Super Lost." His partner replied, "That's called being a parent. You're doing great." The girls started showing progress in different ways. The oldest began helping younger kids at her school, channeling her protective nature into leadership. The second oldest discovered a talent for basketball, and James never missed a game, even if it meant switching shifts. The middle girls started a little business selling friendship bracelets, showing their entrepreneurial spirit early. The second youngest turned out to be a math whiz, often helping her siblings with homework. And the youngest? She became the family's heart, always ready with a hug when someone had a bad day. James adapted too. He learned to braid hair like a pro, mastered the art of removing stains from school uniforms, and could tell when each daughter needed space or a hug just by the way they said morning. His fellow officers noticed the change in him. He seemed more patient on the job, more understanding with troubled teens they encountered. The neighborhood watched their unusual family with curiosity at first, then with growing admiration. The girls became known for helping elderly neighbors with groceries, and James's house turned into a safe haven for other kids in the area. Other single dads started coming to him for advice, and he always made time to listen. 1 year after the adoption was finalized, James organized a special celebration. He called it their Family Choice Day, the day they all chose each other. He took the day off work, and they had a backyard barbecue with all the people who'd helped them along the way, fellow officers, teachers, social workers, and neighbors. During the party, his oldest daughter pulled him aside. "Dad," she said, testing out the word she'd only recently started using, "I need to tell you something." James's heart skipped a beat, worried about what might come next. "I used to be so angry at the world," she continued, "but you taught us that love is stronger than anger. Thank you for choosing us." James hugged her tight, trying to hide his tears. "No," he whispered, "thank you for choosing me back." This was just the beginning of their journey together, but already they had learned the most important lesson, that family is built on love, trust, and the daily choice to stand by each other no matter what. As the years went by, James watched his daughters grow into teenagers, each developing her own unique personality and dreams. The challenges changed too. Gone were the days of basic homework help and bedtime stories. Now he was navigating the complex world of dating rules, social media concerns, and college applications. The oldest daughter was now 16, and James found himself facing one of his toughest challenges yet, teaching her to drive. As a police officer, he'd seen too many accidents involving teenage drivers. "Dad, you're gripping the dashboard so hard your knuckles are white," she laughed during one practice session. "I know how to drive. You taught me yourself." She was right. He'd spent weeks in empty parking lots, teaching her everything about car safety before even letting her turn the key. His police training made him an excellent instructor, but his father's heart made him a nervous wreck. When she finally got her license, she hugged him and whispered, "Thanks for trusting me." The second oldest daughter brought a different kind of challenge. She'd become a star basketball player, catching the attention of college scouts by her junior year. But with this success came pressure, and James noticed she was staying up too late, pushing herself too hard. One night, he found her crying in the backyard after a tough game. "I just want to make you proud," she sobbed. James sat next to her on the old swing set they'd installed years ago. "Sweetheart, you already make me proud every single day. Not because of basketball, but because of who you are." They stayed there talking until the stars came out, about dreams, fears, and the importance of balance in life. The middle daughters, now young teenagers, were going through their own changes. One had discovered a passion for computer programming, spending hours coding on the second-hand laptop James had bought her. The other showed incredible artistic talent, turning her bedroom walls into stunning murals with James's permission and some careful supervision. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One day, James got a call from the school. One of the middle girls had gotten into a fight. He found her in the principal's office, arms crossed, eyes fierce. The story came out slowly. Some kids had been making racist comments about their family. She'd stood up to them, but things had gotten physical. James had to balance being a police officer who knew fighting was wrong with being a father who understood the pain behind her actions. They had a long talk about better ways to handle discrimination, but he also made sure she knew how proud he was of her for standing up for their family. The second youngest was proving to be a mathematical genius, often helping her sisters with their homework. She'd also inherited James's sense of justice, starting a tutoring program for struggling students at her school. "You taught us that helping others is important," she told him when he discovered what she was doing. "I'm just following your example." The youngest, now 12, remained the family's joy bringer. She had a knack for knowing exactly when someone needed cheering up. When James had a particularly rough day at work, she'd leave funny drawings on his bedroom door. When her sisters were stressed about tests, she'd make them laugh with her spot-on impressions of their teachers. James's police work began to change too. His experience as a father to 6 girls gave him a unique perspective. He became known for his skill in handling cases involving teenagers and families in crisis. His fellow officers often sought his advice on dealing with troubled youth. One evening, as James was helping his oldest daughter with college applications, she asked him something that stopped him in his tracks. "Dad, do you ever regret taking all of us in? It must have been so much easier before." James set down the laptop and looked at her seriously. "Easier isn't always better," he said. "Before you girls, I was just existing. Going to work, coming home, watching TV. But you gave my life purpose. You made me a better police officer, a better person, and most importantly, you made me a father. That's worth all the challenges in the world." Their family traditions had evolved over the years. Sunday dinners became sacred time, with each daughter taking turns helping to cook. They still had their Family Choice Day celebration every year, but now it included speeches from each girl about their gratitude and hopes for the future. The community continued to embrace them. James's house became known as a safe haven for kids in the neighborhood who needed someone to talk to. Other officers would bring their own children over for advice, especially those struggling with raising teenagers. One of the most touching moments came when James discovered a scrapbook his daughters had been secretly making. It was filled with photos, ticket stubs, report cards, and little notes, documenting their journey as a family. There were pictures of their first Christmas together, school plays, basketball games, and quiet moments at home. On the last page, they'd written, "To the best dad in the world, thank you for showing us what real love looks like." As James sat on his porch that evening, watching his daughters do their homework, play basketball, and chase each other around the yard, he reflected on how far they'd come. The scared, untrusting girls from that cold night years ago had blossomed into strong, confident young women. They still had their struggles and challenges, but they faced them together as a family. A police cruiser pulled up, and his partner stepped out. "How's the family?" he asked, as he did every time he visited. James smiled, watching his youngest daughter teaching her older sister a new dance routine while another worked on her college essays. "We're perfect," he replied. "Perfectly imperfect, just like a real family should be." The high school years brought new milestones and challenges that tested their family bonds in unexpected ways. As the oldest daughter's senior year approached, James found himself facing one of the most emotional periods of their journey together. One autumn morning, college acceptance letters started arriving. The whole family gathered around the kitchen table, holding their breath as the oldest opened each envelope. When she got to the last one, and hands trembling, James noticed tears in her eyes. "I got in," she whispered, then louder, "I got in, full scholarship." The kitchen erupted in cheers and hugs, but James felt his heart squeeze. His first baby was going to college. That evening, after the celebration died down, he found her sitting on the front porch steps. "I'm scared, Dad," she admitted. "I've never been away from my sisters, from you." James sat beside her, remembering the fierce 12-year-old who had first stood protectively in front of her siblings. "You know what I think?" he said softly. "I think you're ready. You've grown into an amazing young woman. But remember, this will always be your home and will always be your family." The second oldest daughter was making waves in the basketball world. College scouts were regularly attending her games, and she had already received several scholarship offers. But one game changed everything. James watched from the stands as she fell hard after a jump shot. The gym went silent as she clutched her knee. The following weeks were tough. The injury required surgery and months of physical therapy. James watched his usually strong daughter struggle with depression, wondering if her dreams were over. But her sisters rallied around her. They took turns accompanying her to therapy sessions, helped her with exercises, and never let her give up. During one particularly difficult therapy session, she broke down. "What if I can't play again?" she sobbed. James held her hand tightly and said, "Then we'll find a new dream together. You're more than just basketball, sweetheart. You always have been." The middle daughters were flourishing in their own ways. The budding programmer had created an app to help organize the family's chaotic schedule. The artist had won a citywide competition with a portrait series titled Family Beyond Blood, featuring diverse families like their own. One day, James received a call from their art teacher. "Your daughter's series is going viral online," she explained. "People are deeply moved by her message about adoption and family." The artwork had struck a chord, showing that love doesn't care about matching skin colors or shared DNA. The second youngest continued to excel in mathematics, but she also discovered a passion for social justice. She started a club at school focusing on adoption awareness and foster care support. "You showed us that family can come from anywhere," she told James during one of their late-night talks. "I want other kids to know that too." The youngest, still the family's sunshine, had grown into a thoughtful young teen. She'd inherited James's desire to help others, often spending weekends volunteering at the local animal shelter. When asked why she gave up her Saturdays, she simply said, "Someone gave us a chance when we needed it. Now it's our turn to give back." James's role at the police department had evolved too. He'd been promoted to sergeant and used his position to implement new training programs focusing on family intervention and youth support. His fellow officers often sought his advice not just about work, but about parenting and family matters. One evening, after a particularly challenging day at work, James came home to find all 6 daughters in the kitchen, attempting to recreate their grandmother's famous lasagna recipe. The kitchen was a disaster, but their laughter filled the house. "We wanted to surprise you," they explained, presenting him with a slightly burnt but made with love dinner. As they sat around the table, sharing stories and jokes, James noticed how each of his daughters had developed their own way of showing love. The oldest through her protective nature, the second through her determination, the middle ones through their creative expressions, and the younger ones through their kindness and joy. Their family's story had begun spreading beyond their community. A local newspaper did a feature on them, focusing on how their unique family challenged stereotypes about adoption, race, and single parenting. The article sparked conversations about the need for more adoptive parents willing to keep sibling groups together. One Sunday afternoon, while the family was having their weekly dinner, the doorbell rang. It was a young couple considering adoption. They'd read about James's family and wanted advice. As James invited them in, his daughters naturally gathered around, each sharing their perspective on what made their family work. "The secret," the oldest daughter told them, "is that Dad never tried to erase our past. He helped us build a future while honoring where we came from. He taught us that love is about adding to your story, not starting over." The impact of their family's journey reached further than they'd ever imagined. Other single parents, especially fathers, began reaching out for guidance. James found himself speaking at adoption agencies, sharing their story to encourage others to consider adopting older children and sibling groups. But the most profound changes were the quiet ones that happened at home. The way his daughters now responded to challenges with resilience and hope, how they'd learned to support each other through difficulties, the natural way they included others who needed family, just as they had been included. One night, as James sat in his favorite chair watching his daughters help each other with various projects, college applications, art portfolios, math homework, and community service plans, he realized something remarkable. These girls hadn't just become successful despite their difficult start in life. They had become successful because they had learned that love and support can overcome any obstacle. A photo on the wall caught his eye. Their first family picture, taken just days after the adoption was finalized. The scared, uncertain faces in that photo had been replaced by confident, joyful young women. They were no longer defined by what they had lost, but by what they had built together. As college acceptances rolled in for each daughter, James realized their family was entering a new chapter. The oldest had already graduated with honors and was making waves at law school, focusing on family law and adoption rights. She often called home late at night to share stories about her cases, and James could hear the same passion in her voice that he first noticed years ago when she protected her sisters. The second oldest had turned her injury into an unexpected blessing. During her recovery, she discovered a talent for sports psychology. Now she worked with young athletes, helping them overcome both physical and mental challenges. "Sometimes our biggest setbacks lead us to our true calling," she told a group of injured players, catching James's eye with a knowing smile. One spring afternoon, James got an urgent call from the middle daughter's high school. Worried something was wrong, he rushed there, only to find them in the principal's office, not in trouble, but being congratulated. Their coding and art collaboration, a website showcasing diverse families through digital art, had won a national competition. "We wanted to show the world what real families look like," they explained later. "Not just the ones you see on TV." The website had gone viral, featuring stories of adoptive families, mixed-race families, single-parent households, and more. James watched with pride as his daughters became advocates for family diversity in their own unique way. The second youngest had taken her math skills and social conscience to new heights. She started a free tutoring program for foster kids, understanding how easily they could fall behind in school due to frequent moves. "Every kid deserves a chance to succeed," she said during a local news interview. "Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them." The youngest, now in high school herself, had become the bridge between all her sisters. She kept their family group chat alive with daily updates, funny memes, and words of encouragement. When someone had a bad day, she was the first to organize a video call, getting all 6 sisters online despite their busy schedules and different time zones. James's police work continued to evolve with his family experience. He started a mentorship program pairing officers with at-risk youth. "Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to step up," he told his colleagues. "One person to show a kid they matter." His fellow officers began calling him the Dad Sergeant, a nickname he wore with pride. One day, James received a letter that brought tears to his eyes. It was from the adoption agency, sharing how their family's story had inspired a record number of applications from people willing to adopt sibling groups. "Your family showed people that love knows no boundaries," the letter read. "You've created a ripple effect that will impact generations." The family's influence spread in unexpected ways. The oldest daughter's law school thesis on keeping sibling groups together during adoption was being used to advocate for policy changes. The second oldest's work with injured athletes had caught the attention of professional sports teams. The middle daughter's website had become a platform for adoption advocacy. But it wasn't all about public achievements. The real magic happened in their daily lives. Like when all 6 sisters surprised James on his birthday, each taking a day off from their busy lives to be home. They recreated that first chaotic family dinner, complete with slightly burnt lasagna and mismatched plates. During the celebration, the youngest daughter presented James with a special gift, a documentary she'd been secretly filming. It showed their family's journey through home videos, interviews with neighbors and teachers, and personal messages from each sister. "This is our love letter to you, Dad," she said as the film played. The documentary captured moments big and small: James learning to braid hair, the girls teaching him to dance, late-night homework sessions, basketball games, art shows, science fairs, and countless family dinners. But more importantly, it showed the transformation of 7 strangers into an unbreakable family. One scene particularly stood out: James's promotion ceremony at the police department. Each daughter had spoken about how their father's dedication to both his police work and his family had shaped their own lives. "He showed us that one person can change the world," the oldest said in her speech. "He changed our world first, and now we're paying it forward." Their story began attracting attention from adoption advocates nationwide. James found himself speaking at conferences, sharing their experience with prospective adoptive parents. His daughters often joined him, each offering their unique perspective on what makes a family work. "The key," James would tell his audience, "isn't trying to be perfect. It's about showing up every day, learning from mistakes, and choosing love over and over again." His daughters would nod in agreement, remembering all the imperfect moments that had made their family perfect for them. The local community continued to embrace them. Their house remained a gathering place for neighborhood kids, adoptive families seeking advice, and anyone needing a reminder that family comes in all forms. Sunday dinners now often included extended family members, fellow officers, college friends, mentees, and others who'd become part of their ever-growing circle. One evening, as James watched his daughters on a video call, the oldest sharing news about her latest case, the second oldest discussing her sports psychology practice, the middle ones updating everyone on their latest projects, and the younger ones talking about their college plans, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 20 years ago, he'd made a split-second decision that changed 7 lives forever. Now, sitting in his quiet living room, surrounded by photos of his daughter's achievements, he realized that decision had changed countless other lives too. Their family had become a beacon of hope, showing the world that love doesn't need matching DNA to create something beautiful. 20 years had passed since that fateful night when Officer James Mitchell answered a routine call that changed his life forever. Now, approaching his retirement from the police force, he sat in his backyard, surrounded by the family he'd built through love and dedication. His daughters had planned a surprise retirement party, but what they didn't know was that James had a surprise of his own. As guests filled their backyard, fellow officers, community members, and families they'd helped over the years, he watched his daughters working together to make everything perfect, just as they always had. The oldest, now a prominent family law attorney, had just won a landmark case that made it easier for sibling groups to stay together during adoption. She dedicated her victory to James, telling the press, "My father taught me that family is worth fighting for." Her own pro bono work had helped dozens of children find permanent homes. The second oldest had transformed her sports psychology practice into a nationwide program, helping young athletes overcome not just physical injuries, but life's challenges. She'd written a book about resilience, dedicating it to the man who showed me that setbacks are just setups for comebacks. The middle daughter's technology and art collaboration had grown into a successful nonprofit organization. Their platform now connected adoptive families across the country, providing resources, support, and hope to those beginning their own adoption journeys. They'd recently launched a scholarship program for adopted children pursuing creative careers. The second youngest had finished her PhD in mathematics and was using her skills to develop programs that helped foster children stay on track academically. Her tutoring program had expanded to multiple states, and she'd been featured in educational journals for her innovative approach to helping displaced students. The youngest, always the family's heart, had become a documentary filmmaker. Her first feature film, telling their family's story, had won awards and inspired a movement of single fathers stepping up to adopt. She'd captured their journey with such honesty and love that viewers couldn't help but be moved. As the retirement party began, each daughter stood to speak about their father. They shared stories that made everyone laugh and cry. About James learning to do hair, his famous burnt dinners, the way he'd show up at every school event in his police uniform, proud and present no matter how tired he was. But then came their real surprise. The daughters unveiled their gift. They'd secretly purchased a beautiful piece of land and built a community center. The Mitchell Family Center for Hope read the sign in the photographs they showed. It would serve as a haven for adoptive families, providing resources, counseling, and support groups. "Dad," the oldest daughter announced, her voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just change our lives. You showed us how to change others' lives too. This center will be your legacy, a place where other families can find the same hope and love we did." James stood overwhelmed as they explained how each daughter would contribute to the center. The lawyer would provide legal services, the sports psychologist would run youth programs, the tech-savvy daughters would manage online resources, the mathematician would oversee educational support, and the filmmaker would document success stories to inspire others. His fellow officers then stepped forward with their own announcement. The police department was creating a new position, Family Crisis Intervention Specialist, named in James's honor. The program would train officers to better handle cases involving children and families in crisis. As James looked around at the gathering, he saw the ripple effects of that one decision he'd made 20 years ago. Former troubled teens he'd helped were now successful adults. Single parents he'd mentored were raising happy children. Families he'd inspired had opened their homes to kids in need. But the most beautiful sight was his daughters, now accomplished women, still supporting and loving each other just as they had as little girls. They'd overcome their painful past not by forgetting it, but by using it to help others. Each had found her own way to pass on the love and hope they'd received. When it was James's turn to speak, he kept it simple. 20 years ago, he said, his voice steady despite his tears, "I thought I was saving 6 girls. But the truth is, they saved me. They taught me what family really means. And together, we learned that love isn't about blood or race or anything else the world tries to divide us with. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other over and over again." The party continued into the evening, with stories being shared and memories being made. James watched as his daughters moved through the crowd, each so different yet so connected. They'd grown into strong, compassionate women who were changing the world in their own ways. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the yard was quiet, his daughters gathered around him on the porch. Just like they used to do when they were small, They squeezed onto the old porch swing and nearby chairs, looking up at the stars together. "You know what I'm most proud of?" James said softly. "Not the careers you've chosen or the success you found, though I'm proud of those too. I'm most proud of how you love, how you take care of each other, how you help others. That's the real measure of our family's success." The youngest daughter pulled out her camera, catching this quiet moment. "This is what real love looks like," she said. "Not perfect, but perfectly us." In the gentle evening light, surrounded by the daughters who had become his whole world, James Mitchell knew that sometimes the best families aren't born. They're built, one act of love at a time. And as they sat there together, just as they had so many times before, James realized that retirement wasn't an ending at all. It was just the beginning of a new chapter in their extraordinary family story. A story that would continue to inspire and change lives for generations to come.